Hey everybody, welcome to Keeping It Real with Phil. Want to do a little discussion on different types of fishing lines and when I might use one over the other. If you have some tips that you'd like to share, please share them in the comment section. Uh, and going to just talk about monofilament, fluorocarbon, and braid, and when I might choose to use one over the other. Start off, the first line I want to touch on is a monofilament line. Here's a fun fact for you. Monofilament, or mono, was developed by DuPont, and it was introduced by Stren, and which was a thinner, at the time, much softer line, and it casted on a variety of reels, including spinning reels, and Stren soon became, a favorite of bass anglers, and the history of monofilament started, with me as a young boy, and that's pretty much what we had. So using a Zebco 404 or whatever and push button, it came spoiled with Stren monofilament, and I don't know if it was 14 pound or whatever, and that could be casted very easily on spinning reels, or closed face reels, and even on bait casters. As I progressed to bait casters, so that was the line back in the 80s and 90s, and coming into the 90s is what we used. I remember throwing monofilament with 20-pound monofilament for my Carolina rig, and have like a 14-pound monofilament as a leader. And there's so much stretch in monofilament, and so when you'd go to set the hook on with a 1 ounce weight on there, you took a big old sweeping hook set. So that's is a little bit different now with the monofilament and the braid that we have. But the cons of the line was that it had lots of stretch, and it wasn't always the best for certain types of situations. But you made do, and you used it for a lot of different applications. Um, the second type of line I like to talk about is braided line, which actually became popular in the 90s, and the line had an advantage over monofilament in certain situations, like flipping. It didn't have any stretch. It was super tough, and it lacked that stretch, and it was great overall in relation to its diameter. The actual breaking strength of a braid commonly exceeds the pound test rating. So, however, the disadvantages of braid is that the abrasion resistance can be low, and the line is very visible underwater. So, that was kind of the line that came out. Didn't really have any color to it. I remember we used to take Sharpies, black Sharpies, and every few inches, we'd put a dash, and we'd do it for the first 10 feet to try to make that line invisible while we was flipping grass or whatever. And so the finally there's fluorocarbon line, right, which by far is the most popular line nowadays, and what most bass anglers use for a variety of applications. It became a mainstay of many bass fishermen. Many bass fishermen knows because it has less stretch than mono, and it's virtually invisible under the water. And it has decent abrasion resistance, and the line sinks better than monofilament. So on applications where you're using drop bait, stuff like that, I'll go into that a little bit later. It's by far better than monofilament. Although the cons of fluorocarbon is that the line is stiffer than mono, and it's higher cost, and certain types of knots can cause more frequent failures. So let's break down the three types of fishing lines, and when I might choose to use one or the over the other. Monofilament line still has a place in my arsenal, but it's very limited to the pound test that I use and the applications that I use. One of the applications I might use monofilament is on top waters. And, you know, I'll use it on a bait casting rod typically, and reel with 10 to 15 pound Vicious monofilament line. So, you know, Vicious has a variety of, pound test lines, anywhere from, 25 or more to 8 pounds is usually what I use in monofilament, or fluorocarbon. And but in monofilament, I tend to use 10 to 15 pounds. So, the monofilament that I use with Vicious is the Ultimate Premium Monofilament. And, I typically, the 2 to 3 pound test that I use in monofilament is 14-pound test, 10-pound test, and occasionally, if I'm wanting to throw a crankbait and maybe over the grass or something like that and keep it shallower, I might use up to a 20-pound test monofilament. And also, like I said, for crankbaits, and especially when I'm fishing around rocks and stuff like that, because monofilament is very abrasion resistant. So it's really good for the applications, and it has stretch. So for, top waters with treble hooks, the smaller top waters is typically what I use monofilament for. And then also with crankbaits, there's at times when I'll use monofilament, on crankbaits. And, and typically when I do that, it's in the 15 to 20 pound test range, because if I want to get that crankbait deeper, I'm probably going to use fluorocarbon. So, mono stretches a little bit. It helps when you got that fish hooked, and to keep him hooked when he's shaking his head or whatever, so that he don't get that pendulum motion going on that crankbait, especially if he's hooked by the back hook, and can throw your bait. So it's a little bit better, when you're in them applications, fishing around rocks, trees, stuff like that. I do like to use monofilament because it is abrasion resistant, and also it has stretch. So, and then Carolina Rig Leader, that's the other time that I'll use the 14-pound, monofilament, Vicious monofilament, ultimate fishing line, is when I'm throwing a Carolina rig. And I may choose to use a braid main line or a fluorocarbon main line. It just depends on water clarity and different stuff. But I like the monofilament line because it tends to float that bait up off the bottom a little bit better. So that's when I'll use the monofilament. The other type of line I want to cover real quick is braided line. I probably use braided line more today than I ever have in the past, and that might surprise some people with the advent of forward-facing sonar. But with the braided line on spinning reels, and then tying an FG knot to a fluorocarbon leader is a really, really nice combination. Especially if I'm fishing on the bottom and I'm wanting to see that line move, or see that fish when he takes that line, see it move, see it pop, see it run. That braided line, and I use the No Fade braid by Vicious, and in the high visibility yellow color. So it's no fade, and typically I'll use anywhere from a 15 to 20 pound main line on my spinning reels. It's just really nice. It casts farther, and it also has a good strength to it, and it doesn't have a lot of stretch. So I can feel that bump when it happens, and I can see that line take off. So stuff like Ned rigs and even drop shots and stuff like that, I'll have a main line, 15 to 20 pound, no fade braid with a fluorocarbon leader. And so the other time that I use braided line is, I like the 50 pound for my big ploppers and for my big whopping baits and buzz baits. I'll use, depending on how heavy the cover is, I'll tend to use the 50 pound no fade green braid from Vicious, and I really like that line for that application. And then punching, sometimes though, before I get into punching grass, I'll use the 30 pound no fade braid and green, and for basically top waters, might be buzz baits, smaller top waters maybe, just depends on water clarity or whatever. I'll go with the 30 pound. And then punching baits, punching grass. Once again, I'll go with the Vicious 50 pound no fade braided line in green color, and that braid just plain strips off the spool easier than fluorocarbon, and the strength allows me to turn fish, turn their head out of that grass a lot easier. And however, I will warn you that with the advent of heavy tungsten weights, it will tend to, make that braided line get frayed. So I got a trick for you. I'm going to show you in a little bit, on how to prevent that from happening, and we'll go in that in a little bit. And then I learned the hard way when I lost key fish due to the line fray while punching with tungsten weight. So, I came up with a little deal that will help you whenever you put fluorocarbon, because it will also fray, when you're using heavy tungsten weights, worm weights or punching weights. So, we'll go into that even in a minute. And so with tungsten weights and fluorocarbon and braided line, you either need to buy the tungsten weights with the inserts already in them, and they're a little bit more costly than buying the tungsten weights without the insert. So, I got a little trick for you to add to your arsenal and save a little money in your pocketbook. And that is basically taking, shrink tubing, and then, what I typically do with the shrink tubing is I'll, buy it. You can buy it at O'Reilly's or someplace like that. And I typically get, a variety pack, because, I'll even use the shrink tubing for other things. Like, for instance, let's just say that your rod sleeve on the end, some rod sleeves are just sewn on the end, and they tend to get over time they'll tend to get tore, or the little end cap, the end piece of cloth or whatever it is will come off, and so your rod eye tip punches through. So what I'll do in that case is I'll take the bigger shrink tubing and put on that rod sleeve, and then shrink it down, and there you go. That'll close that up, and it's better anyway. And so, but for this little application, I tend to use the kind of the smaller, the smaller shrink tubing, and then how you make it even smaller is basically what I do is cut it in half, and then I'll hold one end, and I'll take a lighter, and then get it pliable, and then I'll grab the end. You don't want to grab your finger because it's hot, but I'll grab the end with some needle nose plier, and I'll pull it, and it'll stretch. And then once I get it kind of pulled and stretched, then I'll go ahead, and the end that I grabbed, right, is going to be bigger. Well, I'll go down and I'll cut, to where it'll go into the worm weight, and then I'll go ahead and stick that into the worm weight down to the point where I was holding it, which is going to be fatter, and then I'll go ahead and cut that off. So this is one that I did right here, and also I'll typically will take a piece of wire, and I'll go through, and on the end that I was holding, I'll punch that wire through to make sure that hole is really good. So that protects your line. It keeps it from fraying. If you can't get the braided line in there, then what I'll typically do is actually tie it on the braided line, tie it on to some monofilament, because monofilament or fluorocarbon goes through it really easy, and then I'll just pull it through. Because, you know, braided line is real pliable and everything. So, you know, I'll just tie it on there and pull it through, and then, you know, and there you go. So that's a good little trick for you. Use shrink tubing to put in your worm weights. You can figure it out, but that's basically how I do it. And it works really well, and it keeps your line from fraying. So that's a good little trick for you, a little tip of the day. All right, back to our discussion on fishing lines and the different types of fishing lines, and when I might choose to use one fishing line over the other. And the last one is fluorocarbon line, which I've touched on a little bit, but when I really like to use fluorocarbon line, and I'll use it in pound tests from 8 pound to 25 pound fluorocarbon. And the Vicious 100% fluorocarbon line is the line that occupies most of my bait casting reels and some of my spinning reels. So, you know, a couple of my spinning reels I do use straight fluorocarbon, and that's in the 8 to 10 pound test. So, you know, there's a broad list of techniques that you can use fluorocarbon with. But here are a couple that I think it really shines on, and one is drop bait. So, you know, if I'm fishing Texas rig worms or wacky worms, or I'm fishing jigs, or I'm fishing a shaky head or punch baits, you know, especially if the water's real clear and the grass is kind of sparse, you know, I might go with the 20 or 25 pound fluorocarbon with a, you know, 1 ounce or a 3/4 ounce weight, you know, to punch grass. But for the most part, you know, the size of the line really depends on the weight of the sinker or jig head, you know, and the water clarity and the cover. So I'll tend to use the smallest diameter line I can get away with. You know, for a couple of reasons. To make the bait look as real and lively as possible, and also so that the fish, you know, can't detect it. So, you know, also if I'm going below, say, a 1/16 ounce slip sinker with a small worm, or I'm fishing a wacky worm, and I need to utilize lighter than 12 pound test, then I'll usually go to a spinning rig, which is what I said. So 8 to 10 pound, you know, on my spinning rig. So the other time that I might use fluorocarbon is on moving baits. So, you know, spinner baits, jerk baits, chatter baits, even crank baits, when I want to get them down there deeper, and, you know, want to get in them zones where it's 15 to 20 foot deep. The fluorocarbon line sinks better, it gets it down there better, and so it'll make your crankbait run a little deeper. Typically with moving baits, you know, I'll use the thickest diameter heavy as possible, because, you know, I want that strength. So, you know, depending on water clarity, you know, I might go with the, you know, and the depth that I'm wanting to fish, you know, I might go with 15 pound, you know, fluorocarbon or 12 pound fluorocarbon. And there's some cases where I'll even go up to 17 pound fluorocarbon on crankbaits. And then as far as shallow running crankbaits, if I'm fishing around rocks, or I'm fishing around timber, and I'm fishing a square bill, something like that, you know, I may even go up to 20 pound or 25 pound fluorocarbon. So, you know, you know, why heavier? Well, you know, unlike fishing drop baits, you know, fish where the fish is usually, you know, getting a pretty good look at the bait. When you're using a moving bait or crankbait, remember, they're not getting a really good look at your fishing line or whatever. So you can get away with heavier line, you know, even with monofilament or braided line, right? So, you know, also, you know, on a side note, I will say that you should also gauge what the heavier line will do to the action of your bait. So, you know, if you're really trying to do a finesse presentation, or you want a lot of action out of your worm or something like that, the heavier line will hinder that a little bit. So, you know, also think about that when you're trying to choose the size line for an application. Well, that pretty much wraps up the discussion on fishing line and when I might choose to use it, and when I might choose, you know, not to use one over the other. But I will say, you know, Vicious line, I've tried a lot of different fluorocarbon lines. I'm really happy with Vicious line. And you know, it's a line that I haven't had a lot of failures on. So, you know, super happy with it. And like I said, they have a variety of pound tests in monofilament and in fluorocarbon and in braid. And I like the no fade braid because, you know, I ain't got to worry about that braid fading on me over a period of time, because braid lasts a long time and you can keep it on you real long time. So, you know, that'll save you some money, you know, in the long run. So, you know, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed these fishing chip tips. And thanks. You know, this is Keeping It Real with Phil. We'll see you next time.